covering today, and so glad about the expert that we have to cover that topic. We're talking about bit and bridle fitting, and Kailyn Pupa is here with us. And Kailyn and I were just talking about how just wildly important it is to have a bit of a grasp on this topic, but it's kind of an underrated topic. And there's a lot of resources out there for things like saddle fitting and just much fewer resources out there for this topic. But I know that it's top of mind for you guys, and I know that you recognize how important it is because I fielded questions in our private Facebook group just an hour ago, and that thread is going off. So I know you guys are curious about this. I'm going to get to as many of your questions as I can, just relay them to Kailyn. But to start, Kailyn, thanks so much for taking the time to teach us about bit and bridle fitting.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. Maybe to start, will you just give us some context of like background about yourself and information about your bit and bridle fitting business or how it fits into your business?
Yeah, sure. So, like probably most of us, I grew up just being a crazy horse girl and just taking lessons and, mucking stalls so that I could hack the pony for 5 minutes. And um, kind of wasn't sure what I wanted to do within the horse industry. I always dreamed of being a rider or a trainer, and just, that's a very hard route to go down. So I was grooming and managing at a 5-star level, and I got to go to all different shows, and I learned so much, and it was really, really fun. But I ultimately just wanted to go back to school so I could learn more about how I could support the horses and kind of like their soft tissue and improving performance through comfort as opposed to using like gadgets and different things. So I went to school for veterinary physiotherapy in the UK, which was a 2-year master's program I'm nearly finished with. And
Whoa.
I really just wanted to do the bit and bridle fitting because I knew people would ask me about their bits and bridles, and I wanted to be able to have an answer for them. I wasn't really, it kind of blew up in a way that I was not expecting at all. It really kind of took over my business, which is great because it's so important and it really goes hand in hand, which I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit later. But yeah, it's been really fun, and it's something that I know people are super interested in, which is amazing because it's so important.
Yes, totally. So, are you in the UK right now?
I'm in Wellington right now, so I'm
Okay.
done with the first 2 years were in person, and I'm qualified as a physiotherapist now. This last year is just research, so I'm doing research in equine biomechanics.
Okay, amazing. And you told me before we got on that you have a presentation for your master's program coming up this Friday. So we're especially grateful that you have fit us in because I know just like the pressure of something like that. So we are very grateful, and that's such a cool background. Are you are is your work discipline specific in any way?
Not necessarily. So like my background personally is in dressage and show jumping, so those are the two disciplines that I know the most about. I have a lot of clients that are competing in those disciplines, but when I'm home for the summers, I'm in New Jersey, and I really have a huge range of clients. I do Western horses, I do eventing horses, I do lesson ponies. So it's really all over the place.
How cool. So you will your typical program be New Jersey part of the year and then Florida part of the year, or is that
Yeah.
unique to this year? Okay, cool. Well, that's nice too. So people can catch you in one of those two places versus just
Yeah,
the
I'm up and down the East Coast.
nice. I love it. And do you just before we dive in, do you travel for clinics at all, or are your clients coming to you?
I have had a lot of people reach out to me wanting to do bit fitting clinics, and I would love to be able to travel, but the logistics of it are really complicated because I have hundreds of pounds of inventory, like bits that I use for my fitting. So it's complicated to travel. For the right situation, I can do it, but it's a little bit takes a little planning.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. It's not what I would have. I thought you were gonna say like you have horses at home. Um,
Oh no.
the yeah, have to have bits with you, and that's
Yes.
100 pounds of bits is a lot to travel with. Okay, good to know. Let's because I got so many questions ahead of time. Let's just jump in. These will be
Yeah,
kind
sure.
of I'm not going to theme it out. I'm just going to take them as we got them.
Perfect.
They're such good questions. So thank you, everyone who submitted a question ahead of time. Thank you so much, because I can tell this is already going to be just a really value-packed conversation, because I have all of these at hand. So to start, Sarah said, what's considered a soft bit? Obviously not a twisted wire bit, etc., but between a single jointed snaffle and a French link snaffle, what's softer? Is thicker really milder?
Okay, lots to unpack with this one. So I think we should be a little bit careful thinking about bits in terms of like softness, harshness, like those kinds of words we do have to be a little bit careful with, because as the old saying goes, any bit can be cruel or harsh in the wrong hands. You know, even hackamores and bitless bridles, I've seen injuries and problems from those. So I think she asked between a single joint and a French link, which one like would I prefer? Which one's
Exactly.
softer?
She said between a single jointed snaffle and a French link snaffle, what's softer?
Okay, so a French link snaffle, when we look at that little lozenge in the middle, the French link itself, sometimes I see this confused with like a regular double broken snaffle, like a three-piece snaffle. The French link is referring specifically to like the little small, it's a flat plate and it's kind of shaped like a peanut, is what a true French link is. And I don't love those. I don't carry them. And the reason is when you pick up the reins, the whole bit and the mouthpiece itself is going to rotate. And that really thin edge of the plate is going to press right onto the horse's tongue. So it sort of traps the tongue where it is, and the horse is not able to move it as they should be. Um, and when we look at how everything in the body is connected, so this is where my background as a physio, I think, really helps me in the bit fitting. So the tongue, a quick little anatomy lesson here. The tongue is attached to the hyoid bone, which sits kind of right underneath your horse's jaw bones. And then the hyoid bone has muscular attachments that go all the way down to your horse's sternum. So the bit choices that we make are affecting the tongue, of course, the TMJ, all the way down their neck into their sternum and into their shoulders. And then, of course, the shoulders are connected to the rib cage, which is connected to the back. So it's all connected. So going back to the original question, why I don't like a French link is because when we're trapping the tongue and restricting the tongue, it's really restricting the whole entire body as well.
Wow, that is so interesting, because it definitely is perceived as a soft bit. And
It
I mean, I hear what
is.
you're saying. Bits, the hands are soft, not so much the
Right.
bits. But what a great explanation, and it's so nice to have the understanding behind it too. You sparked curiosity in me about bit and bridle fitters in general. I'm assuming it's very unique to have the kind of level of education that you have as a bit and bridle fitter, and pairing that understanding of anatomy with bit and bridle fitting and how they fit together. So my first question is that unique? And my second question is, for people who aren't on the East Coast, what would what would you recommend that they look for in a bit and bridle fitter to kind of have someone who brings the important perspectives to the table in this, bigger picture?
Yeah, it's hard because there's really only a handful of us in the whole entire country that I'm aware of. So I'm not sure what other people's educational backgrounds are. Like I think some of them are probably former riders and trainers, which they have a very unique perspective that I don't have. Like I would not consider myself an amazing rider or trainer by any means. So I think everybody brings something unique to the table. What I'm bringing is the anatomy and how the bit choices and the bridle choices that we make can affect the way that the horse moves, the way that their body is actually functioning, whereas the riders and the trainers have a really good feeling of, how the bit is feeling in the contact to them and how they're giving their aids and how the horse is responding. So one thing I will say is we have to be a little bit careful because some bit fitters are very, very closely associated with specific bit manufacturers. That's kind of similar to how saddle fitters work. Like they have to sell the saddles to make their money. So I don't know for certain what other bit fitters where they're making their money exactly, but you will notice some patterns that they are very, very closely associated with a specific brand, and that's usually all they carry and it's all they recommend.
Super good to know. And then in that same vein, is it possible to do like a virtual bit fitting consult that will be fruitful, or is it just too hard because you're not able to try all those bits on the horse and really see how it fits and whatnot?
Yeah, I don't offer virtual consults at the moment, but it's something that I'm kind of considering because, like with the French link, somebody can tell me that's what they're using and I can just right off the bat tell them, no, we got to find you something else.
Totally.
But the reason I haven't done it is because I feel like I am doing them a bit of a disservice, because a lot of what the information that I use to make bidding recommendations is what the horse's oral anatomy looks like. So I'm actually looking in their mouth, I'm looking where their teeth are, I'm looking at the shape and the size of their tongue, I'm looking at the size of their palate, the height of their palate, how the bars are sitting in their mouth. And then it's a really in-depth written evaluation as well. So I think sometimes people think I'm going to come into the barn and look in their mouth and tell them, here's exactly what you need. And I wish it was that simple, but the written portion of it is so, so important. And being able to try the bits and seeing how the horse is responding to all the different ones, that really helps me narrow it down until we can find the perfect fit for that horse. So virtual consults I can do very basically, like, yes, I think what you have is appropriate, or no, it's not, and here's something else to try. But you are losing that huge value in being able to test ride so many different brands and bits and options.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. I hear you. Um, Next question we have is from Maria. She said, I love this question. It's very straightforward. Loose ring keepers, yes or no?
Loose ring keepers. I don't know that I've seen a loose ring keeper. I've seen full cheek
I was
keepers, but
wondering
I
what
don't
it
know
would
that
be.
yeah.
Let's assume that maybe she meant full cheek keepers.
Okay, yeah. So the full cheek keepers, for the most part, I don't really use them and I don't really recommend them. Reason being is that when you just put the full cheek in the horse's mouth, they can kind of move and play with their tongue and sort of position it in a way that they're comfortable with, which is often very different to where it's going to sit if you put the keepers on. And a little like experiment that I like to do when I have fit the horse in a full cheek and they ask me, does it need keepers? I'll actually take the bit and twist it so that it is sitting where it would sit with the keepers. And a lot of the times the horses get a little bit irritated. It starts to move its tongue, pull his tongue up in the mouth, he'll start crossing his jaw. And it's just, you don't really need them. You have to be a little bit careful with the full cheeks. I think a reason that they're recommended a lot is so that those little arms don't get caught in things if the horse is rubbing their head on something. So that is something you have to sort of consider. But I think kind of the risk versus reward for them, I don't really recommend them. I don't think you need them.
I love it. Okay. Good to know. Um, Debbie said, I just started using a loose ring. My mare seems to be doing well. Does Kaylin have any feedback, opinions, etc. on leather bits? Oh, she's sorry. She said, I just started using a leather loose ring and her mare's doing well. What are your thoughts on leather bits?
I don't mind them. They're not something that I carry, but only because I don't have a good way to sanitize them. I have a really strict sanitizing procedure that I go through for the bits that were tried and going to be reused. It's very hard for me to sanitize a leather bit. So that's the only reason that I don't carry them. It's not because I don't like them. It's just they're difficult for me to work with. The one thing I would check with it, well, two things I would check with them. So sometimes they can be quite thick, and that's a problem because when you have a really thick bit, and this applies to any bits, not just leather ones, when you have a really, really thick cannon, you have to be careful because some horses don't have space in their mouth for that. And the problem with that is that they can't close their jaw around it all the way. And that puts a lot of pressure on the TMJ, so their jaw joint. And that is problematic because, kind of like what I was saying before, how everything is connected to each other. So if we're putting pressure and disturbing the TMJ joint, it's going to cause stiffness through their neck, which causes stiffness through their shoulders. There's a lot of myofascial lines which run through the TMJ. And if you're not familiar with that term, myofascial lines is essentially this concept where different muscles in the body are actually connected to each other. They're not just connecting like bone to bone, like a muscle does. The muscles actually have some connections to each other as well. So the myofascial lines, a lot of them run from the TMJ down the neck, down the back, all the way down to like the horse's back hoof. So actually by disturbing and kind of irritating the TMJ with a bit that's too thick, it has a negative effect on the whole entire horse, which is really fascinating. And it's something that people might not believe until they feel it. This is kind of a little side note here, but I think there maybe were some questions about this. When you're looking at bridle fit and we're looking at where the buckles are sitting, one of the first things that I change is when the buckles are too high and they're sitting on the TMJ, that again can irritate that area. So by just lowering those buckles, it makes a night and day difference. Sometimes that's the only thing that I have to do in my bit and bridle fittings, and it's incredible. It's if you go to the barn tomorrow or tonight and you look at your bridle and you see those buckles are really high, change it. You'll be amazed at the difference it makes right away.
Gosh. You move a buckle, you're like, my work here is done.
Yeah, I'm like, done.
But I mean, given the change that it can cause, it doesn't have to be hard to be, transformative. So that is so interesting. Can you help us locate the TMJ?
Yeah, so on a human, it's kind of right in front of and a little bit above your ears. So if you put your fingers there and kind of open your jaw, you'll feel it moving. On the horse, it's kind of similar. So it's kind of above the eye and a little bit back, a little bit under the ears. If you have a body worker or a chiropractor, they can definitely show you exactly where it is. Your vet, of course, too, can show you exactly where it is. If you Google like horse TMJ, you'll find some pretty good pictures of it. But you'll kind of feel these two bony bumps, which are the two bones of the TMJ itself. And then in between that is where the actual joint is.
Amazing. Um, that's so interesting. Okay. Let's see. The next question we have is from Anna. She gave a few. So to start,
Okay.
it's kind of a high level question. What are some signs that you have the right bit for your horse?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question. So, something that I think has we kind of talk about in like horse training is that we want the horse to be chewing on the bit. I actually don't agree with that. I would rather see a horse that's really nice and quiet and relaxed in its jaw and relaxed in its tongue. For me, if a horse is chewing a lot, what they're usually doing, they're not always actually opening and closing and chewing their jaw. Sometimes what they're doing is they're using their tongue to kind of lift and pull up the bit in their mouth, and it's hitting against their teeth, and that's what makes that sound that kind of sounds like they're chewing. And for me, that means that they're not happy with something, whether it's the bit or they're feeling some tension and discomfort somewhere else in their body. Um, so if I like to see a mouth that's really nice and quiet and relaxed, their jaw is nice and quiet and relaxed. Something that I look at kind of as a physio perspective, which ties into bit fitting, is I look at the muscles of the lower neck. Because of, again, how everything is connected. When you see tension in that area, sometimes it's because of how they're holding their jaw and their tongue. So I look for those lower neck muscles to be nice and relaxed and quiet. We want the contact to be nice and steady, so your horse isn't constantly lifting up its head or trying to pull the reins out of your hands. And just you can be really adjustable and really have that nice harmonious communication with your horse. It doesn't always feel like it's an argument or a fight, or you have to ask the same questions multiple times because your horse just isn't listening to you. Um, all that to say, even if all of that seems okay, there could still be something that's better out there that is, can improve all of that even more. But those are things that I typically look for.
Interesting. That is so good to know about chewing on the bit. I wonder why that has become a thing that we associate with a good response. It makes
Yeah, I
sense
think
that it
it
wouldn't be the best response.
I
What you
think
say?
it has to do with like they think it means the horse is trying to accept the contact or like thinking about the contact and thinking about the bit, which there probably is some truth to that. But in a well trained horse and a well schooled horse that already should have understandings of what we're asking them to do in terms of contact, nice, quiet, simple mouth is what I like to see.
Okay, great. Next question is similar. What are some signs you have the right bridle fit for your horse?
Kind of similar, honestly. So really steady in the contact. They're not constantly flipping and moving their head a lot. Kind of tilting the head side to side can be a sign that they're unhappy with the bridle. So if they're holding their head nice and straight and steady, unless we're asking them for a bend, that's a great sign. And also, I think their behavior when we're putting on the bit and the bridle can give us a lot of information too. Sometimes I have seen horses that yawn a lot before you go to put the bridle on. And what they're typically doing there is they're trying to loosen up their TMJ themselves in kind of preparation for the tension that they're feeling in that area. So if you have a horse that really yawns quite a lot before you go to put the bridle on, could be a little sign that there's something could be irritating them. And just if they're happy to put the bridle on too, like if you really have to fight with them because they're putting their head in the air like a giraffe, they might not be happy with something and they're anticipating that and trying to avoid it.
That just made me sad because I had a horse that yawned a lot before I put the bridle on. And I didn't take it as a sign of discomfort. I took it as a sign of like, um, just kind of prolonging the period before we get to work. But
Yeah.
it's, this is such a good example of like when you know better, you can do better.
I
And
was just going to say that, like, a lot of the things that I have learned through this, I look back on it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I used to ride a horse with that, or I can't believe I used this tool in this way. Like that was so damaging, but it's really true. You do the best you can until you know better, and don't feel bad if you're learning things through this conversation and you're feeling horrible. It's if you didn't know, there's, now's your time to be able to improve and make your horse's life even more comfortable and happy.
totally, we, the best that we can do is, consistently be learning so that we can be better for our horses.
Yes, exactly.
Um, but yeah, that yawning one hit me. um, all right, still from Anna. She says anatomical bridles are very in right now. Is there a benefit to using one versus having a well-fitting traditional bridle?
Yeah, they are. And this is something that I really wanted to talk about. Things that are marketed as anatomical, they sell for whatever reason. Somebody in the marketing department figured out that if you slap the word anatomical on something, people are going to buy it. So, all of the kind of different crazy shapes and pieces and things that you can find out there, for the most part, I think they're a little bit gimmicky. And I think that they are taking advantage of the fact that the consumer is looking at the words anatomical and um, thinking that they're doing better for their horse when it's not necessarily true. And quote unquote anatomical bits and bridles, they really run the gamut of things that are really out there and really crazy to something that maybe just has a little bit of curve here and they're using that as anatomical. For anatomical bridles, the biggest thing that you'll see is the crown piece or the head piece, so the part that goes over the horse's head and behind their ears. That's where you'll see some really crazy shapes and patterns and sizes and padding and things like that. Uh, Unless you're working with a professional or you really feel confident knowing what to look for, I would recommend just a simple straight headpiece. And reason being is that when we get these really strange cutouts and shapes, they have to fit your horse's specific anatomy perfectly. And an analogy I've seen thrown out there is like if you go to buy a dress, you can buy a dress that is just kind of basic and you can tailor it to fit it to yourself exactly. But you're probably not going to be able to fit the dress that's been tailored to your friend or your mom or your sister because your bodies are different. So it's kind of the same thing when we're talking about anatomical bridles. It has to fit your horse's anatomy exactly and specifically for it to be beneficial. Otherwise, you'll start getting corners in weird places and cutouts in weird places, pressure points in weird places. So for the most part, I would steer away from things that are crazy shapes and they look like they'd be really challenging to try to fit. They are challenging to fit.
Okay, good to know. Um, she said, and this kind of relates to Debbie's question about the leather bit. Anna said, "Can Kaylin speak to the different materials that bits are made of and why you might choose any of the various different materials?"
Yeah, so there's again tons and tons of different things out there: leather bits, plastic bits, metal bits, different types of metal. And they do all kind of serve different purposes. Like a plastic bit or a synthetic bit, rubber bits are going to be very different feeling for the rider and the horse compared to a metal bit. When we're talking about metal bits, there are different materials like copper, sweet iron, stainless steel, things like that, that all these different companies will typically kind of make a blend of whatever they think is best and they can market and sell. Um, to be honest, I don't notice a huge difference. Like there are some bits that are very, very, very expensive because of the material that they're made out of. And mechanics wise, that's a different, different discussion what the mechanics of them are. But if we're just talking about the material of the bit, I don't notice a huge difference between ones that are very, very expensive because of the material and a more basic one. You do have to be a little bit careful with buying bits from kind of like an unknown seller, like Amazon or something like that, where it's suspiciously inexpensive. Some of those, I would probably venture to say that most of those are not tested for toxicity, so you don't really know exactly what they are. That's the one thing that I will say with metals. And then like weird colors and things, like I've seen bits that have like a rainbow coating on them. I would not put that in a horse's mouth because I don't know what that is and if it's safe for them to be eating essentially.
Yes, totally. Um, this reminds me when you were talking about sanitizing your or sanitizing leather bits in general. I have not ever thought about sanitizing bits, and my mind kind of went to, the trainer that has like a bucket full of bits or a wall
Hmm.
full of bits, and you're trying every different bit on and everyone's sharing. I don't know what the dangers are to that. Can you tell us, like, is it important for everyone, if a bit is going in multiple horses' mouths, to be sanitizing bits and why? And if yes, how do you do it?
Yeah, so for me, I'm just in different barns, different states sometimes, but I'm in so many different barns every day. And so the biosecurity for me is really, really, really important. I might be a little bit overkill with it because a lot of the horses I have are show horses. So I know that they have to be up to date on their vaccines and everything, but I don't think you can ever be too careful. For like a big, very large barn where there's a trainer with a bucket of bits, I wouldn't be as kind of worried or excited about that because all the horses are living in the same environment. So there's likely different contamination between, feed buckets and water buckets, and they're being groomed by the same people, they're being handled by the same people. So that's not something where I would be very curious to like really sanitize the bit in between horses. I would clean it, definitely get all the grime off because that's just not comfortable or nice for your horses to have in their mouth. But in terms of sanitizing, unless you're sharing like with a friend where their horse is stabled at a different barn than you, just out of an abundance of caution, you can certainly sanitize them. For me, I wash them at the end of the day when I get home and I have a car full of dirty bits. I wash them with like some Dawn dish soap and I let them dry, and then I'll soak them in a little bit of like chlorhexidine and then rinse them, and I let them dry in the sun until they're completely dry. And the sun actually kills a lot of viruses and things that the other stuff can't touch.
Wow, that is really interesting. I didn't know that. Um, and just great that you just follow that policy because it does make sense being, you know, going to different locations where horses have not been exposed to one another.
Right.
Um, Makes sense. Okay, last one from Anna. She said, I was once told riders tend to choose bits according to their own preference and riding style over what the horse's actual preference is. For example, many riders ride all of their horses in the same bit or the same 2 to 3 bits. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is a great kind of topic and thing to start discussing because there is a pattern that I do notice is that when I when I fit like a barn full of horses that are all trained and ridden by either the same person or the clients are trained by that same trainer, I will notice the pattern that a lot of them will end up in either the same or very, very, very similar bits with similar mechanics. And it has to do with the way that we give the aids and the response that we're wanting from the horse. And everybody's a little bit different. Um, and sometimes I've fit a horse that gets ridden by the owner and the client, and they end up in one bit. And that same horse that when it's ridden by the trainer ends up in a different bit. because just like, again, the way that we give the aids is so different and the feeling that we're wanting can be so different. For the riders that kind of put the same exact bit in every horse's mouth, you have to be a little bit careful with that because the horses' mouths are all shaped a little bit differently. So it's probably unlikely that the best option for every single one of those horses is the exact same bit. It might be similar mechanics wise, but there's so much that we can play with in terms of like cheek pieces and sizes and the thickness and diameter and the joints themselves that yeah, when you have a rider that just their default is the exact same bit, that's something that I would like to be a little bit careful about doing because it can open up some problems.
Got it. Okay. Next up is Ashley. Ashley has 3 questions. And this question was our most common question amongst everyone who sent questions in, which I was really interested in. Ashley said, Ashley and several other people said, what type of, oh, she said bridle. So bridle and bit were asked. What type
Mhm.
of bridle and bit is most appropriate to start a young horse in?
Oh, that's a very good question too. So it kind of depends. I feel like I've answered that a few
No, you
times
were
now. It
being
depends.
perfectly specific. Of course, I mean, so much of what we cover in Ask an Expert, it does depend, and we're talking about something
Yeah.
that's like custom to horses, but you're giving us the perfect amount of like guidance on the topic. So don't feel self-conscious about that. You're doing
Okay.
the perfect job.
So for a young horse, what I typically think works best for them, and as long as the trainer agrees, is that I want to keep things really, really simple so that they can understand what the correct answer is to what we're asking of them. And typically that's going to be something like a flexible soft bit. So when you give the aids, it's really quite steady in the horse's mouth and they have an easier time kind of understanding what we're asking them to do, or a single joint so that there's not a lot of moving parts and pieces in their mouth so that they can really, again, just understand what we're trying to ask of them and the communication is very clear. As that horse progresses through its training, it probably is going to need a different bit at some point because we'll start asking more complicated questions and the communication just needs to be refined a little bit more. But for most young horses, I like to start them in either like a flexible soft bit or a single joint. But again, it just depends on exactly what how that horse is and what their personality is like and what the rider's personality is like. And then for bridles, again, just something really, really simple. I like the monocrown bridles a lot. The When you have the bridles where the noseband strap goes up and over and underneath the other part, if you flip it over and look at it, it's a really, really narrow piece of leather that all the pressure from the bit and the bridle is going to be concentrated on. So that's always something that I try to get people to switch out of. If that's not in the budget, you can also just add like a piece of padding, like the halter fleece is a really pretty affordable and easy thing that a lot of people have in their barns that you can put over the top. That helps a lot. And I also don't love like drop nose bands and flash nose bands because it again, it's just really restricting to their jaw and it affects their whole entire body the way that they're able to move and use their back and engage their hind limbs, which is something that we're all usually looking for in our horses. Um, so just like a simple cavesson noseband for a young horse too.
Does the preference away from a drop noseband and a flash apply to any age or level of horse, or is that specific to young horses?
Yeah, any age horse. And so when you look at the biomechanics of the way that the neck and the jaw are kind of working together, the jaw has to be able to relax in order for the horse to be able to bend laterally like we're asking them to and to flex and extend their neck like we're asking them to. And you can see this for yourself. So if you kind of just relax your jaw and feel how your teeth are sitting and contacting with each other, and then if you slowly move your head up and down, you'll feel how your teeth are sort of shifting and moving against each other. That's your lower jaw that's moving. And the same thing needs to happen with our horses when we're asking them to bend side to side or to collect and, be ridden in a frame. If we're restricting the movement of their jaw by a tight noseband, like a or a noseband with a flash or a drop that's put on too tightly, when the jaw can't move, neither can the rest of the neck, and then neither can the rest of the body.
I can confirm that I can feel my jaw moving as I move my head. If you're
Yeah.
listening to this after the fact right now, actually go ahead and like tilt your head back and forth and experience that, because it does make sense that if my jaw were strapped together, that wouldn't be very unnatural. Let me see. Oh, so the next question from Ashley. Some of these are going to start to touch on things that you've told us about.
Yeah, that's okay.
Um, and I'm just going to go over them so that if there's anything you want to add, you can. So
Perfect.
Ashley said, is there a disadvantage to starting in a Micklem or something like it versus a traditional snaffle bridle?
So the problem that I see with the Micklem style bridles, which is where the attachment to the bit is really closely attached to the noseband. And something you can try if you have one of these so that you can see what I'm talking about is if you put it on your horse and then if you like not on the horse when you're standing there and looking at it, if you move the bit side to side with your hands, you'll see the whole noseband actually shifts and moves across their nose, which is what's going to happen when we're riding and we're steering and giving rein aids. That works okay for I would say some horses. Some horses do well with having kind of the pressure distributed in that way. But the majority of the horses that I have worked with, they don't appreciate that. It's a strange sensation to have something slide across your nose like that. And they actually do a lot better when you switch out to something that's a little bit more simple.
That is, I mean, I'm glad I asked that because you gave me more context than I knew. And so that kind of, again, applies to any age horse. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great.
But I would say, especially for a young horse where they're still learning what it means to be a ridden horse, the more simple and straightforward and kind of easy to answer questions that we're asking them until they start to progress through their training, the better. So by switching out of something like a Micklem where there's a lot of input in a lot of different areas on their face, sometimes they do better with that.
Understood. Okay. And then I want to circle back. You mentioned the type of noseband that you would suggest switching out of because the pressure point is, I mean, the pressure is concentrated in a small area. Will you describe that noseband again? Because I wasn't totally tracking what you were describing. But
Oh,
also, I'm
yes.
curious if there's any other type of bridle. Like when you said that, I was like, oh, I wonder what else she would generally suggest people switch away from. And you've touched on some of those things already this conversation, but if there's anything you haven't touched on, I just wanted to open that door.
Yeah, so sorry if I wasn't clear. It's not the noseband itself, it's the way that the noseband attaches to the bridle. So you'll know if you have one if the noseband buckle is just on one side, because that means that there's a strap of leather that's going all the way up under the crown piece of the bridle and then down on the other side. Those are the ones that I don't love. And if
Got
you
it.
switch from something like that to a monocrown, which is where you'll have buckles for the noseband on either side because the top is all just one continuous piece, that's my preference.
Okay,
So it's not the
perfect.
noseband itself, like there's drop nosebands, figure eights, flat, like all the different types of nosebands can have that attachment to the bridle.
Okay, so that's super helpful. I think that was more on me than on how you described it. Is there anything else like that that you generally steer people away from that we haven't touched on yet? Or do you feel like you have mentioned a number of things that maybe aren't your favorite, which is great.
Yeah, so those type of noseband attachments, I try to get people to switch away from. And then kind of what I talked about before, like the really crazy shaped headpieces, I typically
Okay.
try to get people to switch away from. And when I'm talking about crazy shaped headpieces, it's the ones where like there'll be kind of two pieces of leather with either an elastic or like some sort of strap attachment between them, or like really really wide shaped headpieces with big cutouts or big like again quote unquote anatomical shapes to them. Those are things that I typically try to get people to switch away from too.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Moving I keep inserting my own questions in
No,
here.
it's okay.
Um, Ashley also said, what are some common signs of bridal discomfort or poor fit? Um, in an older broke horse. I'm not sure if it will differ for an older broke horse, but you can tell us. And then she said, do you have any tips on how to try and troubleshoot for a happier horse? So again, this is kind of covering something we've talked about, but is there anything to add on that?
So something that I do during my bit and bridle fittings, and then something that you can either ask like your vet or your body worker or your chiropractor to do is I palpate for any sensitivity or restrictions in the TMJ, in the pole. So the musculature of the pole gives me a lot of information about if the horse is kind of having some discomfort and they're holding tension there. That's again something your body worker or vet can help you palpate. I also check the range of motion of the pole joint. So that's the atlanto-occipital joint, which is where the skull is attaching onto the rest of the neck. If they're really tight and restricted in that and they don't have good range of motion there, that can be a sign that their bridle is not fitting so well and they're, again, holding tension there. And then a lot of the neck musculature too. So the big one that I check is the brachiocephalicus muscle, which is kind of that lower muscle on the neck, which gets really overdeveloped in a horse that has very high head carriage. So that muscle gives me a lot of information. If you're looking for something to check yourself without involving these other people, which is what I recommend, like the muscles in the body don't really lie. They're going to tell the full story. But if you're looking for something to check yourself, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before with behavior. When you're bridling, if you're having a hard time, your horse is very reluctant to bridle, that's something that could let you know that there's something going on there.
Got it. Our next question was a funny one because Hannah, she said this is mostly rhetorical, but why aren't more bits made in 4 3/4? Her Arab wants to know. And Hannah has generously shared a lot about Dara, her Arabian. So we all know she has like a typical petite face. But then a number of people said, me too, me too, me too, for the 4 3/4 size with different breeds of horses. So
Mhm.
it is mostly rhetorical, but is there anything to add on that? Are they truly hard to find? Are they made but just, out of stock, or what color do you have to add to that?
Well, so it's funny that this has been brought up because I do actually have some thoughts about this, and it's probably not what you would expect. Two thoughts actually. So first one is that most people put their horse in a bit that is much too big. So that's something that I see all the time. So I'm wondering if a part of that is because those are the sizes that are being bought most often, are the bigger sizes, is that's what they're going to keep manufacturing. And also, I think in the previous maybe like 10 years, let's say, it used to be a lot of bigger sport horses is what we wanted. And now we're breeding horses that are smaller and more refined. And like we're kind of going back towards more of like the thoroughbred style of horses where they have smaller faces, they have smaller jaws. And actually, like the larger size bits can be hard to find too because we're breeding horses to have smaller faces. So the 5 inch, the 5 1/4, and like the 5 1/2 or 5 3/4 are the sizes that I sell the most often because that's what fits most horses. The 4 3/4 is typically more for like, ponies or very small horses. Smaller thoroughbreds sometimes need a 4 3/4. Um, but I'm wondering if it's because people typically buy the sizes that are too big.
I would have thought you said people have their horses in bits that are too small.
Yeah,
um
it's usually too big is what I see
yeah,
more often. Certainly too small I see also, but
yeah. We're doing it wrong one way or another. um I'm curious. I had a horse who was in a loose ring snaffle, and she would get like rubs on the corners of her mouth. And so we put little guards there. Like it was like a rubber guard to prevent
Mhm.
her from getting those rubs. Is is the fact that those rubs exist a sign that she's in the wrong bit, and maybe the guard is not the answer, but the better answer is either different size bit or different bit?
Not necessarily. Like some horses just they are more sensitive and they're prone to rubs on their face. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong in the bit fit or the training or, something kind of bad, let's say. Like it could just genuinely be that the horse is more sensitive there. Um, with the loose rings, you do have to be more careful about the correct size because you can catch their lip like in the little opening, whereas if you just have a fixed cheek, there's not any kind of like moving mechanism there that they could pinch their lip in. So kind of a general rule is that if you're switching your horse from a bit that has fixed cheeks to something with more of a loose ring mechanism, you do want to add a size up so that they have space there for the ring to move and not catch their lips in. And the other thing is that if you go too large, you can start getting rubs because as the whole bit is moving side to side in their mouth, there's skin that's being irritated that way.
Wow. Okay. Good to know. Next up, we have Ellen. She said, would you use a single jointed or a double jointed bit? Oh, no. She said, what would you use a single jointed bit for versus a double jointed bit? Is one better than another?
Okay, so this is probably going to be like the most controversial thing that I say tonight.
Okay, we're ready.
Um, so single jointed bits, I think, have been really vilified by the internet for whatever reason. You know, if you Google about them, you'll find stuff about like the nutcracker effect and they squeeze their tongue and they're not fair. We shouldn't be riding with them. They all belong in the garbage. I actually don't agree with any of that. As long as it's fit correctly, you're not really going to have that nutcracker effect at all. They can be used in a way that is completely fair. Some horses really do a lot better in them over a double joint. It has to do with the way that it's interacting with their tongue and their lips and, you know, all the structures in their face and the way that the rider is giving the aids and what we're asking of the horse specifically, which will kind of help me decide whether we're going single joint or double joint. So to answer the question, which one I prefer, it depends.
Thank you for kind of dispelling the myth though, because I think sometimes everyone is familiar with this. Things get run away with on the internet and people
Yes.
become experts who are not experts and sometimes well intended. But it's really nice to have somebody who truly is an expert on this topic dispel the myth and, set us straight. So that's important. That's why we have these
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah, I don't know where it came from or where it started originally. I mean, I think there is some truth to it. If you have a bit with a single joint that is much too big, so you have a lot sticking off the side of their face, that can kind of squeeze their tongue, and that's not so fair to them. But if you think about the way a nutcracker works, you have to bring the two arms of it really, really close to each other before that nut actually starts getting squeezed and cracked. And if you have a bit that fits correctly, it's basically impossible for that to happen because your horse has a face in between its tongue or around its tongue. So even if you're, you know, putting a lot of pressure on the bit, which we shouldn't be doing, but that's another discussion. Um, it's not going to be able to pinch the tongue in a way that's that extreme, like you kind of will see talked about in certain internet circles.
Yes. Okay. Um, Next question. If you have a horse, also from Ellen, if you have a horse hiding behind the bit, but wait, but heavy in the, I think she probably, okay. If you have a horse, I'm going to read it exactly how it is. Maybe you know what it is.
Okay.
Also, if you have a horse hiding behind the bit, but heavy in the HS duo, training aside, what would be something that you'd switch to?
Okay, so she's talking about the Sprenger duo, I think, which is a
Got it.
specific type of bit.
Okay.
So typically when they're hiding behind the bit, we're going to try to find them something that they're really comfortable like leaning into and stretching into as opposed to kind of anticipating and wanting to hide behind. And there's, you know, so many different reasons that could cause that in the first place. It could be a training issue. It could be something that has happened in the horse's past that's making them a little bit scared and overreactive to the bit. It could be a body issue. It could be a saddle fit issue. You know, so many different things can cause that. But we're wanting to find something that the horse is really comfortable to kind of lean into and create more length in their neck as opposed to curling up and behind it. So the Sprenger duo, which was mentioned, is a fantastic bit for that because it's so comfortable and it's really stable. It gives a really nice feeling for the horse, and it kind of gives them the confidence and encourages them to like reach out and lengthen. But in this case, if the horse is too heavy in that, then this is a horse that I would probably recommend like a double joint for, because you have that joint in the middle that they can sort of use to press their tongue against and create a little bit more length.
Amazing. That was kind of a demonstration of, like we talked at the beginning, how much can you do in a virtual consult? That's a great demonstration of like, without seeing the horse, you can still kind of say, maybe try
Yeah,
this
and like
instead.
beyond that, I have probably about 50 different double jointed snaffles in
Yeah,
my car that I would then have to narrow down from. But
totally.
yeah, I can give a little bit of guidance, but
Get on the
beyond
right
that,
track.
yes.
Um, I love it. Something that you've talked about multiple times already is bit fit. How does one figure out what size their horse should be wearing?
Yes. So kind of the easiest way to do this is if you put the bridle on your horse and then you pull the bit kind of out the side and see how far you can slide it in their mouth. If you can get like, an inch of bit out of the side of their mouth, it's way too big. The caveat to that is that sometimes there's some bits that are kind of like marketed and designed in a way that it seems like you need them to be too big, and then what you'll do is it's too big, but in order for it to like look like it fits or feel like it fits, you have to crank it up really high in their mouth. So you have to kind of watch that too if you're doing that test, that it's not passing that test because the cheek pieces are cranked up and it's so high in their mouth. But for the most part, like if you watch videos or see pictures of yourself riding, and if you're giving an aid on one side and like half the bit is hanging out of the horse's mouth, that's too big. um, to see if it's too small, if it's a loose ring mechanism, so like there's movable pieces on the side where the ring is actually going through the mouthpiece. You want the entire hole that ring is going through to be out of the horse's mouth on both sides so that it's not catching their skin. If you have a fixed cheek bit, like an egg butt or a D ring or something like that, you want it pretty flush against their face so that it's not shifting side to side, but without it squeezing. And kind of the telltale sign that one of those bits is too small is that the rings will sort of like hang off of their face like this. So, um, like that's because it's not wide enough. So the bit rings have to fall out to give that clearance there.
Interesting. And how do you know if the bit is the correct height?
Yeah, so that's a whole other discussion that gets a little bit more complicated because this one actually requires you to put your fingers in your horse's mouth. And it has to do with, and this is kind of touching on like this wrinkle rule that you'll see floated around or trainers talk about. You want one wrinkle, two wrinkles, no wrinkles. And that can be a little bit harmful because we're negating the fact that each horse's lips and their teeth are not lining up exactly the same on every horse. So I like to call it like how big their smile is. So where their lips end in relation to where their teeth start to begin. So if we put the bit according to like, let's say the two wrinkle rule, if the horse's teeth are lower in their mouth and we have two wrinkles, what can happen is the bit is starting to hit their teeth before we even give a rein aid. And that's really uncomfortable for the horse. That creates a lot of problems like, they're opening their mouth, they're sticking their tongue out, they're maybe tossing their head. They're not happy because it's not comfortable. So the best way that you can kind of find the right height for the bit is if you use your thumb and you kind of run it up your horse's bars, and you have to be careful, of course, when you do this, but you can actually run all the way up until you hit their tooth, and you can see where their lips are ending in relation to where your finger is with your tooth, with your finger on their first tooth, and kind of use that to help give you guidance, because sometimes, oftentimes I would say, it's a lot lower than people think. Like I think we have this idea that their teeth are like way far back and wherever we put the bit they're not going to interfere, but they do, and I see that really often is the bit is just much too high in their mouth, and it's not comfortable for them by following that rule, the wrinkle rule.
Yes. Okay. That is really good to know too. I'm learning so much tonight. um, the last question I want to put out there is kind of giving you an opportunity for any important things we miss. But basically, the umbrella question is, what are some common misconceptions? Of course, we've covered. I mean, the wrinkle rule is such a perfect example of them. But you've touched on a ton throughout this conversation. Are there any that we haven't touched on that would be good to leave people with?
I think the biggest thing I could say in terms of like misconceptions is to be careful with the way that brands are marketing their things to you. And I know I talked about this a little bit with the anatomical bridles and things. But the marketing department is going to tell you whatever they think you want to hear to buy their bit. So if you Google any brand bits, really, and you'll read the description, and it does all these miraculous things. It lifts their shoulder, it creates softness in the pole, it fixes everything. That's not really true
I need that
for
bit.
yeah. So like it's a miracle bit, it does everything. Just be careful with that. And there are some too that will be marketed as, it's so soft, it's very friendly, it encourages, it's so kind and gentle, and that could not be further from the truth. Some of these bits have really harsh mechanics that are not fair to the horse. The shapes of things are not fair, they're not comfortable because of the way that it's going to tilt and move when the horse is actually being ridden. So that would be my biggest thing, is when you read a claim directly from a manufacturer, just take it with a big grain of salt and know that they are trying to sell their products to you. They're not necessarily doing it with the horse's best interest in mind.
Okay, I love that. That's a perfect thing to leave people with. Just help us be more conscious consumers, really, like just
Yeah.
aware consumers. Take it take it all with a grain of salt, like you said, or a salt block. or
Yes, sometimes a very
um
large salt block.
yeah. Um well, you are just fantastic. This entire time we were chatting, I was like, wow, true, just expert in every sense of the word. And you took each of these questions and gave us so much valuable information to make us better for our horses. So, what a treat. And I also, after talking to you, I have no doubt that Friday's presentation, you're going to knock it out of the park because it's
Oh, thank you.
impossible.
I hope so.
It's impossible that you wouldn't. Um, you're just, you're wonderful. So I'm so glad to know you, and truly, truly appreciate you taking the time to teach us more about this. And I think I speak for everyone's horses too in saying thank you, because they're going to be the ones who really benefit from it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. That's really when I wanted to go back to school and start doing this, my biggest goal was just I want to make the world a nicer place for horses to be in.
Yeah,
So I am so happy to share this with you guys, and I hope you learned something, and I hope you'll have happier horses because of it.
totally. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kaylin. Have a wonderful evening and rest of the week.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me.
Bye, everybody. All right, we are out of recording, but this platform typically, like people who are watching on Facebook, can still see us for I don't know for what reason. It lasts for like a minute, but I meant everything I said. You